Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Khalil. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just waiting on one final speaker, and then we will begin shortly.
Okay, Mahin, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I can hear you. Sir, we're just waiting on one final speaker, and then we can begin.
Dr. Aqdas?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Khalil, you are.
Oh, thank you.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम ब्रिगेडियर साहब, क्या हाल है आपका? ठीक ठाक हैं?
वालेकुम, क्या हाल है सर? खैरियत से? How's life and
अल्लाह का शुक्र, ठीक ठाक.
What time is there with you?
It's 7 p.m.
Okay, great. So
Not too late. I've had like meetings around like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. as well. You know, it's very difficult for people to always, adjust their timing according to Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is, like a really huge difference.
How's the weather with you?
We are actually now in spring, so we are moving towards summers, hopefully soon. But Melbourne is always cold. If you can locate Melbourne on the map, it's very close to Antarctic, and there's nothing in between to block the cold air. So we are, it can change even in summers very quickly.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, once the situation normalizes, inshallah, we'll have you here, and then of course you can experience the Melbourne's very shocking weather as well.
Let's hope inshallah. So Mahin, can we start? Meanwhile, the third speaker can join us.
Sure, sir. We can begin. All right, let's begin. Assalamu alaikum, and a good afternoon to all our speakers and our participants. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's webinar organized by the Islamabad Policy Research Institute on the subject Afghanistan's economy in crisis, possible scenarios. We are fortunate to have with us 3 speakers who will speak on the subject today. As we begin our event, I will humbly request all our participants to send in their questions via our YouTube live stream. We will try our best to entertain all the relevant questions as we can towards the end of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have with us today Dr. Aqdas Afzal. Dr. Afzal holds a doctorate in economics from the University of Missouri. Along with presenting his research at several international economic conferences, his works have also been published in renowned international research journals. Dr. Afzal has also served in various teaching positions and has also won numerous awards for his research work. He is currently working as program director and assistant professor of economics at Habib University, Karachi. We expect him with us shortly. We also have with us Dr. Samina Khalil. Dr. Khalil holds a PhD from the University of York in environmental economics and management. She holds an extensive experience in environmental economics and natural resource management through her various international fellowships and scholarships. Along with this, she has also carried out research in collaboration with various international organizations such as the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and WWF, among many others. Currently, she is serving as Director, Applied Economics Research Center, and a research professor at the University of Karachi. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we also have with us Dr. Zahid Shahab Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed is a researcher focusing on peace and security in South Asia and the Middle East. He has worked on numerous international assignments at institutes such as the USIP, Transparency International, Commonwealth Foundation, and Global Integrity, among others. Dr. Ahmed is currently working as a research fellow at the Alfred Deakin Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. With that, I would like to request our acting president, IPRI, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, for his welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Mahin. And considering the paucity of time, I'll be short and crisp in my introductory remarks. I welcome all the three distinguished panelists, and I'm sure each one of them is very competent to delve into necessary details about a subject on which very less has been spoken. Other dimensions of geopolitics, security, and the governance aspects have been amply discussed in several fora since last couple of months as the situation has been unfolding. But the economy itself, how the Afghan economy is actually designed, built, how it is sustained, what nourishes it, how it was hooked on aid since last 2 decades. And we know through some of the writings and some of the research insights that 90% to 80% of the Afghan government's sustenance, economic sustenance, was dependent upon external aid. It was a conflict economy since long, and there were other elements like organized crime, narco trafficking that plugged into that, and it was a veritable witch's brew and a potpourri of an unorganized, informal kind of an economy, which was buttressed by economic doles. And as long as the United States and the international aid agencies were on board, Afghanistan's Ashraf Ghani government coasted along. But now Afghanistan is confronted with a real challenge, and the challenge is how to sustain itself, how to run the basic municipal services, how to take care of the banking system, how to prevent a run on the banks, how to take care of external trade flows, and all those economic issues which are of immediate nature, and other issues which are of long-term basis, like how would the economy be sustained in the long term? Would it be based on how much would be the contribution of external aid? What would be the contribution of internal economic resilience that the Afghanistan as a state at the present has in its present form? We would like to learn from learned speakers as to what are the various elements of Afghan economy, how they are built, and what are the challenges that are lying ahead. And I'm sure each one of them is quite competent to enlighten us on several dimensions. So if Dr. Aqdas is on, we can start with him. Otherwise, Mahin, you can request the speakers in the order that you described them, so that we
yes.
start with the discourse. Meanwhile, we'll right.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Afzal actually has a few minutes to come. So if we could carry on, Dr. Samina Khalil, maybe if I could please request you to say a few words.
Okay, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely, you are.
First, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, I'd like to thank the Islamabad Policy Research Institute for inviting me to participate in this webinar on a very important and very relevant and timely topic for discussion. That is the economic crisis situation in Afghanistan and different scenarios that the country has to face with. I think the economy of Afghanistan has never been in good shape for the last many years. And high average annual growth of 9% from 2002 to 2013, it did not sustain and never got translated into socio-economic development of the country for very obvious reasons. Now, the World Bank's World Development Indicators, they show that the annual GDP growth of Afghanistan, it fell from 14.4% in 2012 to 2% in 2013, a kind of a very drastic reduction in the GDP growth, and 1.3% and 1.5% in 2014 and 2015, respectively. This drastic economic decline is mainly the result of the post-2014 international military drawdown and the year of intensified political instability that followed the 2014 election. The foreign troops once brought hundreds of millions of dollars into the Afghan economy, and their departure from 800 bases, yes, large and small, they deprived the country of what was after 2002 its largest single source of revenue. So by one estimate, more than 2 million Afghans have now lost jobs in logistics, security, and other sectors of a war-driven economy. So the dollars from US in huge amount, they were actually returned back and never meant to contribute in the growth of the economy of Afghanistan. But it returned back to the manufacturers of arms and ammunition and all war-related equipments based in USA. Now, the current scenario in Afghanistan is that the Taliban are now in control of Afghanistan for the first time in 20 years and now facing an economy on the brink of collapse, which threatens to worsen an already devastating humanitarian crisis. And yesterday, as we all know, that they have actually formed the interim government. On 15th of August this year, the Afghanistan internal banking system, it froze up. Long queues have formed outside banks, and many of which are closed, and the ATMs are not dispensing money. So with limited access to cash, people are now becoming increasingly desperate. The economy was already extremely fragile, heavily dependent on aid. And Afghanistan as a nation is considered aid dependent when 10% or more of its gross domestic product, it comes from foreign aid. Then in Afghanistan's case, it's about 40% of its GDP that was international aid. So when it became clear that Taliban would gain control of Kabul, the Western powers, including the US and Germany, they suspended foreign aid to the country. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have also then since halted payments. So the foreign reserves of the Afghanistan Bank, TAB, popularly called as the central bank, and they have also been frozen. And DAB has reserves of roughly $9 billion, and most of which is held in the US. So this is a very fragile economic situation. But talking about different scenarios, as the topic suggests, in this crisis situation of Afghanistan, I think the first scenario is, to me, is a kind of a depression and uncertainty. Afghanistan economy is, as we know, is shaped by fragility and aid dependence. And this is the reality of Afghanistan's economy for the last many years. Economic prospects look even more precarious now, as future financial assistance is under a cloud of uncertainty. And Afghanistan does have substantial mineral resources, but the political situation, it has always impeded their exploitation. The aid dependency is, that's, as I said, it's striking. In 2019, World Bank figures show that the development aid was equivalent to 22% of gross national income, which is not the same as GDP, but close to it. This is a high figure, but it is down a long way from the 49% in 2009. Now, those aid flows are under a cloud of profound uncertainty now. Very recently, the German foreign minister, he said last week that we will not give another cent if the Taliban takes over the country and introduces Sharia law. It's a very explicit statement on German foreign minister. Other aid donors, they are not sure of to be watching development closely. And the Taliban overtook in Afghanistan, that has several unanswered questions. about the shape of the future government and its acceptability to the international community, and whether the Taliban will keep their promises as they have made to the world and the intermarket securities as well. They are not sure about it. While the economy is at a standstill, the country is facing an exodus of people, maybe very literate people, very competent people, and with crowds rushing to the airport to try and escape Taliban rule. And we have all witnessed it on the electronic media. Very recently, the Wall Street Journal that has reported that some landlords are now even asking their tenants to stay in their properties for free, because they fear that the Taliban may just take a house if it's empty. And also in response to the Taliban's takeover and Western countries halting foreign aid shipments, international transfer companies like the Western Union and MoneyGram, they have suspended their services in Afghanistan and effectively cutting off the supply of family money from abroad too. So these companies, they recognize that their services that provide a vital channel for their customers to support their loved ones. And they will continue to closely monitor this rapidly developing situation and keep their customers and associates apprised of any developments. So this has basically resulted in that there is hard currency for civilians to access. It's very hard for them, and the banks are almost all closed, and the people are unable to withdraw their dollars. So because of the volatile political situation, the local currency, the Afghani, which is known as Afghani, and which is already low in value, is now worth even less. So there is a falling confidence in the Afghan economy, and that has caused the Afghani currency to plummet. And civilian are basically are now relying on foreign NGOs and humanitarian organizations. And on top of all this, Afghanistan is in the middle of a devastating drought, which according to UN estimates has left around half of the country's children malnourished. It's half of the country, 50% of the children in the country, they are malnourished. And this is the second drought in 3 years in Afghanistan. And the country already had the second highest level of food insecurity in the world. Also, we know that it's very high rates of poverty, and the health system, it's at breaking point because of the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So this is the very unpleasant kind of a scenario, number one. The other scenario for which we could be concerned about, what could be the possible steps to be taken for the uplift of the economy? Well, in a recent article in Financial Times, it is claimed that if we consider that Taliban could get sufficient revenue from illegal mining and opium production or trade routes, then I think we are being very over-optimistic. And also that Taliban revenues from such sources that could be considered relatively large when only running an insurgency campaign, and that they are wholly inadequate to operate a functional government. But I think there is no possibility of Taliban government even to consider increasing their revenue and resources by opium production and illegal mining. As in the past, you must remember that they had adopted very harsh system of penalties for opium producers, and we cannot say that it is the optimistic. Rather, it is not for me, it is not optimistic at all. The World Bank has estimated that on top of foreign aid, another 4% of Afghanistan's GDP that was made up of remittances, that is family members living outside the country, sending money home from abroad. So this meant that it was one of those countries most dependent on remittances in the world, as I mentioned before as well. And I said that the international transfer companies, these Western Union and the MoneyGram, they have already suspended their services in Afghanistan, and they need to actually reconsider and reverse their policy to facilitate the Afghanistan and the transfer of money so as to ensure smooth running of their business in Afghanistan. and also save their customers from huge negative consequences of their decision. I think most of the Taliban's revenue, in my opinion, it will come from taxes and custom duties. But however, so much foreign money suddenly disappearing from the country, there will be far less economic activity to be taxed, not uh, in the short run. And in inflation rises and dollars disappear from the economy, the imports are likely to decline drastically as well. So this is what the scenario is currently, but maybe I'm being optimistic in thinking that new government will be very seriously and pragmatically design economic policies to develop and sustain the growth of the economy in future. The very important for me, I mean, I would call it that important in the sense that the region is going to be affected by these developments in Afghanistan. So what would be the regional scenario in the current situation? So the current crisis situation in Afghanistan is causing concern not only about the war-ravaged country's future, but also about its potential implications for Pakistan's economy in the short and the medium term. Even though the return of Taliban will likely affect all regional economies, but Pakistan is the immediate focus of international investors, as has already been indicated by rising yields of its dollar-denominated euro bonds in the wake of the quick collapse of the previous administration in Afghanistan. So, of the immediate concern for Pakistan is the impact of disruption in bilateral trade and the possible influx of the Afghan refugees. So of medium-term importance is the possibility of a spillover of the insecurity from Afghanistan, which will definitely have very serious implications for Pakistan's security conditions and the hard-fought gains over the last 5 years and vulnerable to the threats from the banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. So the potential implications of insecurity in Afghanistan and the Taliban's failure to address the valid concerns of the world on political and human rights of Afghans, especially women and girls, that could be huge of Pakistan. That would definitely have very pronounced impact on Pakistan's politics as well as the economy. There are already 15 million internally displaced people in Afghanistan and the deterioration of the security conditions. And that is basically owing to the disagreement of the Taliban on a broad-based inclusive government. That could push billions into Pakistan. And that will place a punishing burden on the economy and the external sector. So the security spillover, that will have a long-term impact on investment sentiments. And the surge in the bond yields that immediately after the Taliban retook Kabul, that indicates that the global investors are feeling very jittery. And this is basically causing an upheaval also about the situation. And it will also raise the cost of future debt that Islamabad plans to raise from the international markets to boost its reserves. So in addition to the refugee and security spillovers, it is believed that the Pakistan is facing a very difficult situation with the US and the other Western powers. If we are suspected of somehow endorsing the Taliban and their actions against their opponents or violations of the human and women rights, it would make it difficult for Islamabad to access multilateral dollars and lift debt from the international bond markets. So this will also bring the fiscal and the external sectors under immense pressure and very pronounced stress. I think as some analysts also do that collapse of the pro-India regime in Kabul and the ascendancy of the Taliban, that has reduced security risks for Pakistan. But once the present transition period is over and stability returns to Afghanistan, we'll be able to significantly increase the exports to Afghanistan. And besides this, also we can have the opportunity to having the access to the Central Asian markets as well. So once the reconstruction work starts there, Pakistan will also have a big role to play with most probably with China leading the way to fill the void created by the American pullout from the country. So I think Taliban's comeback has made Pakistan strategically more important to the US, implying Pakistan would continue to receive multilateral dollars. Some analysts have already warned that the fears of insecurity spill over into Pakistan and the resurgence of the terrorist groups linked to the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan and the arrival of refugees. They are well founded. So we can escape these consequences of the regime change in Afghanistan only by helping the international community to convince the Taliban to agree to the formation of an inclusive government representing different groups and ideologies. So some people, I think, do not see much trade or reconstruction opportunity in Afghanistan. Only time, soon or in the short run, that would tell. I think it is understandable that there will be no aggressive development in Afghanistan or a massive jump in trade between the two countries unless the Afghan economy also picks up. Now, the establishment of pro-Pakistan government in Kabul, that will make Pakistan, especially Balochistan, more secure. And I trust it will help complete CPEC projects in Balochistan, besides attracting investment in oil and gas exploration along the Pak-Afghan border. So the greater involvement of China, Russia, Pakistan, and maybe Iran also in Afghanistan, it will be very positive for the country's stability and development. And if China invests there, it will be good for Pakistan as well. So the regional connectivity is an opportunity for trade and investment in the cross-border engagement. And the final recurring theme in Afghanistan-Pakistan relations, it could provide immense benefits to both sides. By the connections to the Central Asia, the Arabian Sea, and India as well, foster the broader bilateral relationship. So to date, threat perceptions have limited the prospects for economic engagements, and both sides have used trade access as leverage to secure bilateral concessions. So in the absence of more regulated trade, border communities that is sponsored from the illicit exchange of goods and narcotics, so without which many would struggle to make ends meet. So finally, my final comment would be that the key terms to overcome the imminent crisis, whether social, political, or economic in Afghanistan and in the region, is peace, political stability, and security in Afghanistan. That's the final thing. And thank you so much for listening to me.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that Dr. Afzal has now joined the conversation. So, sir, if I could please pass over to you to please offer some remarks.
Thank you, Maheen. And first of all, I'd like to apologize. I had some internet connectivity issues, and then they were subsequently resolved. So I apologize for joining in a bit late. Having said that, I would like to take the opportunity to profusely thank IPRI for arranging this very urgent and important discussion on the events that have been changing very rapidly in Pakistan's neighborhood. And I would like to also extend my gratitude to the Honorable Brigadier Saab for agreeing to this very interesting idea because I think without IPRI's help, this would not have been possible. So I just want to say, and I just want to congratulate Dr. Samina Khalil for presenting a fantastic analysis that focuses not only on the economics dimension, but also on the political and the security dimension. And I think that's the value that Dr. Khalil has brought to this event and that is that she has joined the economic with the security dimension. My analysis or my remarks basically focus on the economics dimension. I just want to say that, you know, as most of us have been watching the striking turn of events in our neighboring country, Afghanistan, most of the attention has been focused on the political negotiations surrounding the formation of the new government. And we've heard some information recently coming out of Afghanistan about that. But I think the focus and the attention that our policymakers have been placing on the formation of a new government is not misplaced, because the possibility of sustainable peace in Afghanistan is inextricably linked with the formation of a multi-ethnic, inclusive and representative government in that country. Having said that, I think the immediate problem in Afghanistan is that it's staring down, the country is staring down the abyss of complete economic and financial collapse. And I think if this imminent economic meltdown, if it's left unchecked, I think this will lead to unrelenting social unrest in that country, which could potentially push millions of refugees towards Pakistan. So, I mean, that's the angle that I'm taking in my analysis, connecting the economics with a potential or likely exodus of refugees from Afghanistan. So in order for, in preparation for this analysis, for these remarks, I was looking up some numbers, just very simple population numbers in Afghanistan. So back in the day, when Pakistan was the destination for 3 to 4 million Afghan refugees in the 1980s, the population of Afghanistan at the time was roughly 14 million people. So about 23 to 25% of Afghanistan's population was pushed out, and they found refuge in Pakistan. Well, the situation has changed a bit since the 1980s, and the total population of Afghanistan now is touching 40 million. And if even 2% or 2.5% of Afghanistan's population decides to seek refuge in Pakistan, that number is 1 million people. So you can now understand, how the changing numbers of population make this such a important issue to consider for Pakistan. Afghanistan's economy, even before the US decided to jump ship, wasn't particularly rosy. Afghanistan represents the classic case of demand-driven, supply-constrained economy, which faces an enormous fiscal gap with very weak government revenues. There are different numbers out there, but fully 42 to 60% of Afghanistan's GDP was composed of foreign aid flows. And as the drawdown of international troops started taking place a few years ago, these different nations, or Western nations, decided to cut expenditure. And we could already see that in the anemic economic growth numbers that were coming out of Afghanistan. But with foreign troops, international troops now gone from Afghanistan, I think these international flows are going to completely dry up. In the immediate aftermath of this new political order that has taken over in Kabul, there have been widespread bank runs, cash, ATMs ran out of cash very, very quickly. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of fundamental uncertainty. So it's the uncertainty, not having a government, not being sure about which way the country is going to go. We economists, we call this phenomenon a classic liquidity trap. Economists have been talking about this, when people, because of uncertainty, start hoarding cash, and that drives economies to a standstill. Now, one hopes that with the formation of a new government, some of the uncertainty in Afghanistan is going to dissipate. But, and Dr. Samina also talked about this, that the fact that the US and the IMF has until now prevented Afghanistan from accessing its foreign exchange reserves means that the country right now has no ability to import food, essential commodities, or even life-saving medicines. And as capital flight takes root in the country, a rapidly depreciating currency will create a hyperinflationary situation that will push everything further out of the reach of the common Afghan people. So, this is a very serious situation, because all of this is happening in a country where according to some estimates, 90% of the population was already under the international poverty line, 90%. What all of this means, that this really, really bad economic situation, this impending economic collapse is going to push potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of refugees in Pakistan's direction. Now, where does Pakistan come into all of this? Pakistan, you see, we are not in a position, I think, and this is my feeling, to host another few million Afghan refugees. Despite the increasing poverty incidents in Pakistan, in the immediate aftermath of COVID-19, and Pakistani economists have calculated that roughly 20 million Pakistanis have been pushed below the poverty line in this country. The government could only earmark a paltry 168 billion rupees for our flagship unconditional cash transfers program, which is known as Asas Kifalat. So, I mean, there are some very realistic fiscal and financial constraints that act upon the Pakistani economy. So Pakistan is in no position, financially speaking. On top of all this, whenever any developing country faces a new wave of refugees, these refugees bring about some very serious social, economic, and political challenges. Let's look at the case of Pakistan. I mean, in Pakistan, roughly 25 to 27 million children are already out of school. Now, these are children that should be in school to begin with. If we are now going to have 2 to 3 million Afghan refugees, how is our public education system going to cope with this additional number of children that have now that now need to go to school? So this is a very serious situation. Finally, I also want to bring this up, that there are some unresolved political issues in some provinces of Pakistan. And I think the exodus of refugees from Afghanistan into some provinces of Pakistan is also going to exacerbate political problems. And I think that is also something very serious that our policymakers need to think about. Now, since I would like to conclude my comments very, very soon, what is to be done? I think any analysis would be remiss if I did not proffer what I think should be done. I think with a very heavy heart, I am recommending or requesting policymakers on both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan to please consider that any refugees or any refugee settlements should not be allowed or should not be made or settled in the east or the eastern side of the Durand line. I think whatever refugee settlements you're going to have, they should be on the western side of the Durand line. Now, Pakistan should take a lead in helping potential Afghan refugees. We should be in the forefront. I think we should be sending our doctors, we should be sending our teachers, our nurses, what have you. We should definitely help. But I think in the final analysis, I'm recommending that refugees should be settled on the western side of the Durand line. And finally, I see the Afghan situation facing two complex problems right now. The first complex problem is the formation of a political government. And there have been some movement, some progress in the formation of a political government. But I think the second core complex problem that the Afghan society and leadership is facing is stabilizing the economy that is becoming very, very, very unstable as we speak. So I think they need to dissociate economic management or stabilizing the economy from the other complex problem, which is formation of the political government. And I think immediately what needs to be done is to find some capable people, some technocratic individuals that can be placed at the helm of the Afghanistan Bank, the Afghan Central Bank, who can then assist in stabilizing the Afghan economy immediately. Now, I have some names in mind. but I will not share them here because that would not be fair. But Afghanistan does not have any shortage of capable people. Finally, I want to request Pakistani policymakers, I want to request our economic policymakers, people in the state bank, the governor of the state bank, to please consider the following. Pakistan recently touched its highest ever foreign exchange reserves in history. Now, I have been reading about this. How can Pakistan help Afghan central bank? I think an amazing way to do that would be to extend a bilateral swap line of about $2 billion to Afghan economy, to the Afghan importers. So simply, what I'm saying is that the State Bank of Pakistan provides foreign exchange to Afghan importers to the tune of $2 billion. And that would constitute almost 30% of the imports that Afghanistan made in 2020. So that would cover a very huge portion of their imports. That would not constrain their economy, that would not bring about the shortages that we talked about. And that would be a very, very generous gesture from our side to help our Afghan brothers and sisters. Finally, I think the time has come for Afghanistan and Pakistan, both countries, to work together so that people in both countries can benefit and the living standards of people in both countries can be raised. That is all I have to add today. And I want to thank IPRI once again for organizing this. And I want to thank the participants and Brigadier Janjua for agreeing to host this very important and urgent discussion. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afzal. It was really nice of you to join us from Gilgit as well. So thank you. Now I'll just switch over to the last speaker of today, Dr. Ahmed, if I could invite you to please say a few words.
Thank you, Maheen. Thank you, IPRI. And so as I'm actually not, I would say by profession, I'm not an economist. I study international political economy. So that's what I'll focus on with reference to Afghanistan and its implications. The earlier two speakers have already talked about the various dynamics of Afghan economy. So I'll just focus on some of the issues that they did not mention. So for example, at the moment, reports are coming that Afghanistan's informal lending market is still up and running, which is called the Sarai Shahzada market. Lenders are still giving money. That's another aspect that most of Afghanistan's economy has been actually dependent on these informal kind of brokers or traders, you can call them. Also, their trade with Iran and Pakistan, if you see, a lot of that has been informal as well, and that is also happening as we speak. It hasn't been disrupted or fully disrupted. So another aspect is that 60% of the household income in Afghanistan comes from the agriculture sector. So I think that's one important aspect one has to look at, because even when the country was going through crisis situation, we came across these reports of India having shortage of dry fruits that normally come from Afghanistan at this time of the year. So these are important dynamics. And another, I think, as Dr. Afzal talked about refugees, I think it's important to look at the aspect of brain drain, because while the West is accepting these refugees, most of these refugees are doctors, engineers, or the ones with sufficient amount of skills that the developed world is actually giving them visas as asylum seekers or as refugees. But the ones without any skills will end up in countries like Pakistan or Iran. So that's another aspect I think that we have to look at. And in terms of all the aid that came to Afghanistan, we heard figures like 40% of the GDP. It's important to see that 20% of that was development aid, and aid which was securitized to a great extent. We have a PhD student from Afghanistan, Safiola at Deakin University, who produced a fantastic thesis on securitization of the aid, how these NATO countries were only investing aid money in areas where their troops were deployed within the country. So it was securitized to a great extent, and still we see indications of that. And then is the aspect of everyone talking about Afghanistan's mineral wealth. Okay, for the past 20 years, we are hearing these reports from the US Geological Survey and from other sources that, you know, Afghanistan could be the Saudi Arabia of lithium. Okay, so if that is the case, then many of these countries have been there for past 20 years. Why we see no outcome in terms of anyone exploiting those natural resources? India promised to invest 10 billion in a mine in Bamiyan. That project never took off. China promised billions in terms of exploiting Afghanistan's natural wealth, but that also did not happen. So there are big question marks on the likelihood of anyone actually exploiting those natural resources in Afghanistan, and whether those can actually become a significant source of the country's economy. And with that, basically, the point I want to make is that it will remain aid dependent, as earlier speakers also talked about. But you know, unless there is some kind of a mechanism like the Bonn conference that happened, through which many of the international actors, they committed development aid to Afghanistan, but I don't see that happening due to a variety of reasons. One is the reason, as we just saw from yesterday, the first government that the Taliban have set up, and the international community is criticizing that for not being inclusive. So there was always this concern due to which Afghanistan's own assets were frozen as soon as the Taliban took over. I think it's close to $9 billion of their own assets being frozen, and all the international aid that has been blocked. So there is this dynamic, and I don't see that changing anytime soon from because of the Taliban's own actions, what they have done, and they haven't included all the other various stakeholders in the government to begin with. But looking at positive aspects, Afghanistan's two top trading partners are Iran and Pakistan. They are still doing trade. As soon as the Taliban took over, they made a special request to Tehran to continue the supply of oil. So that is happening. Pakistan's trucks are still going into Afghanistan and so on. And if you look at the embassies of countries that are still operating, it's Iran, Pakistan, Russia, and China. So there is some hope that they will try to keep their engagement there and will continue to find options for Afghanistan to come out of this crisis. It's definitely a crisis because there's still thousands of people who want to leave the country. And as of the beginning of 2021, 4% of the GDP comprised of remittances. And whether or not these expats or Afghan expats are now going to send money back to Afghanistan, there's a big question mark on that as well. So we have to wait and see, because Pakistan has been lobbying very strongly with the regional countries and other countries, for example, in the Gulf and also in the Western world. So there's some key points. Pakistan wants to adopt a regional kind of approach, and Pakistan is also trying that, whatever the new kind of government emerges, it gains enough support in the form of recognition from the international community. And that recognition is also linked to the aid and, these Afghanistan's own assets that have been frozen in the US. So if the new government or new setup will be recognized, then that issue can be resolved for the time being. But in the long run, I think everyone is counting too much on China, and China is not willing to take any leadership role at this stage, because that whole talk of China being more interested in the mineral wealth, as I said, there's a big question mark on the mineral wealth. First of all, whether to a degree to which that can be exploited. I think China's main interest is still in using Afghanistan as a transit in terms of Belt and Road Initiative to connect with Central Asia and to connect Gwadar Port and so on. And Afghanistan is a missing piece of puzzle. And with this, I think I'll conclude on the point that most of these developments are largely dependent on the kind of government the Taliban will ultimately establish. They call it interim setup to begin with, what they have announced yesterday. And we'll see if they really create an inclusive government, and most of the world recognizes it, then I think they're, with that, they'll be able to trade with the outside world, and they won't face any international sanctions to make things worse. And all of that will, of course, will also benefit Pakistan and Pakistan's position in this equation. So I'll just end here, and then if there are any questions, we can address those.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. I would now like to invite our ambassador, research fellow here at IPRI, Ambassador Asif Durrani. He wants to say a few words, and perhaps he has a question. He could start off the question and answer session. Ambassador Durrani, over to you.
Thank you, Maheen. Very educating, in fact, presentations by our illustrious panelists. I wondered that Afghanistan, if you look at it from economic point of view, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Samina, that it was, in fact, it was the American money, or the West money, or the NATO's money, which did wonders, and it raised the GDP of Afghanistan. And now you see that it has come down just to hardly 1%. And I don't think that after coming into power of the Taliban, on the economic front, the projections which are made are quite depressing. But at the same time, if you look at Afghanistan with 60% of dependence on agriculture, and then unexploited mineral wealth, which was already being done and smuggled. And according to one study, Taliban could get $400 million per annum revenues from minerals. Secondly, they could earn $400 million from opium, and around $200 million from toll tax, which even they would levy from the NATO cargo and other all cargo which would pass through the areas which were under their control, even much
before the agreement between Taliban and America took place. So, and having served in Afghanistan, I can see that this whole scenario, it may not be as rosy, but if you look at it, they say that 3/4 of Afghanistan budget would come from the United States and NATO countries. But that was mostly 80% of that was used in for the Afghan armed forces, security forces. Right now, Taliban are not immediately in need of those expenditures, although subsequently in future they will have to have that. Secondly, when you talk about Afghanistan, their own capacity to generate revenues, as rightly pointed out by one of the panelists, would be from imports, customs duties and taxes. Now that is a possibility, and that can generate close to $1.5 billion. And then if you include the drug money, because I don't think that Taliban are going to ban the opium, because even from fiqh point of view, opium is not considered, as far as my experience of Iran goes, that almost 70% of mullahs, they use opium, and they don't consider it as haram. So opium in its crude form is not considered to be haram. But yes, if you want to misuse it, so misuse can be anything. You can misuse grapes into wine, and you can we can stretch our imagination into that. So I think they will continue with the opium production till the time some guarantees are given to them, as was given earlier. And mind you, in 2000, when Mullah Omar banned opium production, actually in the international market, the prices had gone down very much. And it was, in fact, again, a supply and demand question for which forced them. I'm not saying this, these are the UNODC's estimates and statements. So having had these observations, what is your projection or estimate or assessment that how much Taliban government would need the money to run the affairs of the state on bare minimum budget? Because mind you, even now the Western countries are also assessing that Taliban can live and can run the affairs of the government with minimum money, because earlier the money which went to Ashraf Ghani or before that Karzai's government, those were siphoned off. So the level of corruption which you could see during American presence in Afghanistan would be far less than we have anticipated. So in this scenario, what could be the minimum budget Taliban would need to run the affairs nearly smoothly, if not smoothly? So any of the panelists, I would request them if they can enlighten us on that. Thank you so much.
Can I answer that question, if I may?
Absolutely, Dr. Afzal, please, you may.
Okay. I would just like to thank the Honorable Ambassador for raising a very important question. And I also had been thinking about this. Here's what I have to say about this. I think the ambassador has very rightly pointed out that the new Afghan government can survive with much fewer amount of money as compared to the previous governments, because most of the money or the budget that was being used by the previous Afghan government was used for paying the salaries of the Afghan National Army. That's a very fair assessment, but I have something interesting to add here. I think I would like to make a case, and I would request Pakistani policymakers or policymakers everywhere to please give me 20 seconds of their attention, because I think this is a mistake that the Americans made when they invaded Iraq. You know, they basically had experience of denazifying Germany after the Allies had taken over Germany. So basically they denazified Germany. They followed the same policy in Iraq. And I think that the reason why the US was never able to fully pacify Iraq, and the reason why they then had to leave Iraq had to do with de-Ba'athifying or trying to de-Ba'athify Iraq. You know, Saddam Hussein's army, which was trained, which was probably 1 million young men who could fight, they were certainly out of a job. And I think I would implore Afghan policymakers and Pakistani policymakers to find the money to pay salaries to these soldiers of the Afghan National Army that have now suddenly been unemployed. Don't leave young men who have had military training unemployed, because in the medium term, this is going to become a monster that you are not going to be able to deal with. So I think in the medium term, if you have to find the money to pay salaries, even if some of these people are not working, they have to do this. Otherwise, the situation is going to become so bad in terms of a civil war that the spillover of that is going to be completely unable for us to manage, or for anybody for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afzal. We also have another question open to all the panelists, which is, we spoke a little bit of the frozen assets. If they remain unfrozen, if the international community doesn't really add in proper relief to the Taliban, do you think that it will give rise to illegal narcotics and arms traffic? Does anyone? Okay, Dr. Ahmed, please, you may.
Oh,
Okay, maybe Professor Khalil
Oh, yes.
can go ahead.
uh,
Ladies
you please?
first rule here, so I'll speak second.
My answer would be that it would not be in the interest of the Western world also and the US, that they are not going to cooperate anyhow with the difficult situation that the Afghanistan is facing. So
budget ko to bataya nahi ki how much money would they need?
yeah, I agree with the Dr. Aqdas
Close to
that
8 to 9 billion. हाँ, तो उसमें 4 to 5 तो फौज में चलेगा.
Sorry, Ambassador Rani, if you could please mute yourself, kindly. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Samina, you may.
Mahin,
Mine, before I mute, I'm still looking for the answer that what would be the bare minimum budget Taliban government would need to run the affairs. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Aqdas, do you have any estimate for that? Because I think that it's up to the Afghan government to decide about what bare minimum that they're going to require, and it depends on the policies of the Afghan government. And because I don't think so that the researchers in Pakistan, they have done some kind of estimates of such kind, and I don't want to. I mean, myself, I don't want to give any kind of a assumption-based figure. So I don't want to assume on it. So
I
Dr.
can
Aqdas,
give a figure, $5 billion.
okay. Is it your assumption or a very estimated kind of a figure?
It's an estimated figure. I mean, I'm just saying that, the maximum that they can reduce probably is 20%, because my argument is that they should not reduce it too much, because then that would cause a very serious situation with respect to civil war. So the number that I am offering or putting on the table, because the Honorable Ambassador asked me, is around $5 billion.
But I would like to answer this question in a different way. Is that because everybody in the whole world is talking about the availability of the minerals in Afghanistan, and it has got a lot of potential in the exploitation of minerals to get developed if not only in the near future, but in distant future, definitely. So while talking about the minerals, one has to know that about the geology of these minerals that are quite accessible actually. But the problem is that Afghanistan does not have the infrastructure, and it is very underdeveloped, as we know. For this, we need to, I mean, these Afghanis, they need to have roads, they need to have water, they need to have energy and the security. These are all prerequisites to actually get the benefits of exploitation of the minerals, and all these things that will make the transition to availability of these things, putting all these prerequisites in place, that will make the country a transition to a minimum mining-based economy, and which I see it's very difficult unless and until the peace prevails and the security situation improves very drastically in near future. And also the Afghani people, they need trained workforce, and until and unless the government invests in the training of the workforce that is already there, they are going to, I don't want it to happen, but they're going to lose out on a very strong potential that they have got to exploit in the near future, or maybe in the distant future as well. That's the comment that I wanted to make.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalil. Dr. Ahmed, I remember you wanted to say a few words.
Yes, especially I think the point about Afghan national armies or the former Afghan national armies or soldiers integration is an important one, considering how it can be linked to the civil war situation. But also one important fact here is that they were not paid their salaries even for the month of July when they were fighting. Okay, so because as the US troops were withdrawn, these soldiers were not paid their salary. And then there are also reports that $80 billion US actually put into military for Afghan National Army. And these soldiers, many of them were paid more than the US soldiers. So it's a matter of now how much or how little they can settle on in terms of the new setup in Afghanistan. If they are not willing to change their lifestyle, and previously they were paid a lot, they were paid too much, I think, previously when they were, paid through the US funding. So the Taliban have to really, I think, address this issue as soon as possible and maybe reach some kind of an agreement on this, that, like if previously they were earning millions, there's no way they can earn millions now, because, the level of threat won't be the same. And of course, they have to be still happy joining the new setup. So it has to be a respectable kind of salary for still everyone who was, trained by international troops and so on. And this is an important aspect. I agree with Dr. Afzal that this has to be addressed on urgent basis. Otherwise, it's like a disaster waiting to happen.
Thank you. Just another question that was put forth to us. It was concerning the role of Russia and China. Already the Russian presidential envoy for Afghanistan had called for the international community to get together and provide some relief to Afghanistan. Do you think they have any weight in the international community to turn a few heads regarding this? Open to any panel.
Okay, maybe I'll take this one. It's again a matter of, as I talked about securitization of aid and how aid in general works at the international level. So here, I think West is again trying to ensure that they have some leverage in terms of influencing the Afghan government. So they have interest. One would expect that they would have learned from the past experiences when they were completely disconnected from the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. And what happened, we know rest of the story. So they are interested in having some engagement to be able to change the behavior in the manner in which, for example, the new Islamic Emirate is going to operate. So there is this interest. So with this, there is some hope that they would find ways to engage with the Afghan government, and aid is just one way. And I think, aid is also, like it's highly politicized. It always has political objectives linked to it. And it's not just going to be because of, Russia's appeal or Pakistan's appeal, unless these, NATO and, US countries, they agree, plus US, they agree on some kind of comprehensive framework. I talked about, Bonn Conference. Bonn Conference was one of the mechanisms through which they previously agreed on an aid package for Afghanistan. And India was also part of it. I don't see India now showing perhaps, more interest in terms of providing aid to Afghanistan for various political reasons again. But other countries could, and they must, because otherwise, if we look at its spillover, regional countries are already expressing concerns. Pakistan expressed its concern in relation to TTP, China in relation to East Turkestan Islamic movement, Bangladesh has its own concern, India is worried about what will happen in Jammu and Kashmir and so on. So with this, international community, especially I think the developed world, they have to share the heavy lifting of the burden here. Because Pakistan's economy is not in a position to provide direct assistance to this new setup in Afghanistan.
And one more point that I want to make here is that, can I speak?
Absolutely, Dr. Samina, of course.
It's just that the role of China is extremely important. When we see it from the CPEC's point of view, and also the Belt and Road a project of China. And one important thing is that I will again talk about the minerals potential that Afghanistan has got. And it is the technology, it is difficult to estimate because of the utilization and potential. But as a rough estimate, it has already been estimated by some quarter. I was reading last night that it is $1 trillion that is required for the exploitation of minerals. And China is the best placed. I mean, China has got all the potential and all the necessary equipments to enter into this field in the exploitation of minerals in Afghanistan and also get benefit out of it. So because China required, maybe they required some elements which are found in the in Afghanistan as minerals, because in high-tech electronics, smartphones, hard drives, aerospace and defense technology, the elements like the lithium, cerium, and the dichromanium, these kind of minerals are used in high-tech electronics, manufacturing of the high-tech electronics. So I think China has a big role to play, but currently they are actually thinking about, probably they're thinking about the security conditions in Afghanistan, and it's like a wait and see situation for them, like other regional players also. That's it.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here with us today and for their active participation. If I could now bring us to the close of the webinar, but before that, I would like to request our acting president, IPRI, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, for his concluding remarks. Sir? Brigadier Rashid, are you there, sir?
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Mine. I think a very absorbing discussion. And as we come to the end of this discourse, we stand educated on at least a few aspects, because economy is a very wide subject. And if we keep discussing, I think we can spend days on that. But I'm thankful to the participants that they have kept their discourse very focused. And I've touched upon a few key points. Each one of those merits an independent study unto itself. Some very key takeaways from this discourse have been highlighted. And one of them is that Afghanistan needs immediate stabilization, sans which there would be economic meltdown. And along with that, it will feed into a deteriorating security situation. And in order to do that, some concrete, tangible recommendations were offered. One of them was that few technocrats, a group of technocrats perhaps, could be sent in support of Afghan Central Bank and other financial setup, which could help them stabilize and help them engage better with the global economic community. So we could further refine and we can further analyze that, but it appears to be a sound recommendation. Another one is the provision of $2 billion credit swap line to their importers from Pakistan, so as to help them tide over this difficult situation. So its technicalities would have to be analyzed with experts, but I'm sure this is one of the recommendations that's quite tangible, might find resonance amongst the policymakers. Then the point highlighted by Dr. Zahid about informal economy still working is a very important point, and it needs to be taken cognizance of. Some kind of a survey needs to be done as to what is happening there on informal economy front, and what are those informal economic channels between the two countries which could still facilitate a kind of a economic intercourse between the two countries. The point about Afghan budget and its need to finance its defense and security expenditure also. Afghan National Army was an artificial construct which was made by corralling disparate elements. Some of those were not very well trained, and a prodigious amount was spent on their training, but most of them, as Washington Post has told us, it went waste, and the accurate projections were not being made by Pentagon to the White House as well. As a result, we have found this very rapid meltdown. So its analogy with the de-Baathification and de-Nazification, partially one could agree, but in classic sense, this is entirely a different context. And the recreation of a new Afghan army by Taliban would entail a complete restructuring, complete, rethinking of the new concept, what kind of army they need to avert a civil war and to ensure external as well as internal security of Afghanistan. But that, some of the panelists did rightly point out, would not be a very expensive affair, because that earlier army that was created by occupying force was a very, very expensive undertaking, which might not be relevant to the Afghan context henceforth. And the new Afghan economy might not want to be burdened with such an expensive undertaking. But having said that, it's very important to have some kind of a security structure. And some of those elements who were genuinely good soldiers could be called back by Taliban to create a semblance of order and an organized entity which could prevent the collapse of law and order and recrudescence of violence and recidivism into civil war-like situation. A budgetary figure on the question of Ambassador Durrani, 5 to 6 billion. It is also debatable and contingent about various budgeting constraints and planning parameters that Afghan government would undertake. But whatever the amount, the urgent need is for international community to engage and to assess the kind of humanitarian problems that would ensue as a consequence of this economic meltdown. So that is a issue which is immediately of concern, so that at least the humanitarian aid agencies and their aid flow could be unfrozen if it is already frozen. So with these few key takeaways, I thank all the participants for a very absorbing and a focused discussion. And I'm sure we can look forward quite excitedly to another sequel to a similar exercise to build on what we have learned. And I extend formal thanks once again at the end, all the worthy participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the close of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a good remaining of the day. Take care.
Thank you very
so
much.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.